So I think at the early days of the museum, it was very much about, um, and understandably being open soon after 9/11 and all the, effects of those events, the vilification of Arabs and Muslims, the stereotypes around, Arabs as terrorists. There was a compulsion to educate, you know, um, Arabs and non-Arabs about who this community was, what their history was. Um, we've matured a lot, I think, in the last sort of, almost 20 years. And there's a lot of interest about, the diversity and the variety that exists in Arab American culture. We're trying to sort of, as much as we can now, focus on the richness and the diversity of the Arab American experience and Arab American culture.
Welcome to a new episode of Community in Arabic with me, Anwar and Malek. We're thrilled today to have Diana Abouali. Diana is a Palestinian Canadian and currently the director of the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Thank you for being with us, Diana.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you.
Yeah, we're excited. So Diana, you were born in Canada and then you went back to the Middle East to Kuwait. So you have kind of like you've had the experience here and back in the Middle East. Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So I'm Palestinian, as you said. I was born in Toronto, Canada. My parents, they my father's from Nablus in Palestine. My mother's from Gaza. And they met in Kuwait in the 60s. So as you know, a lot of, Palestinians were working in the Gulf, in the Arab Gulf region. And so they met there, they married, and then they immigrated in the late 60s. My father was an accountant. He wanted, I think, partly to get citizenship, thinking of the future. And, he was able to, when we were living in Toronto, actually get a CPA in New York City. So in 1978, for various reasons, I don't know, he's no longer with us, so I can't confirm. They decided to move back to Kuwait, where we had a lot of family, especially my father's side of the family was there. And I lived in Kuwait until I finished high school in 1989. And then I came to the US for college.
Okay. Dan, how was it like growing up in that atmosphere of being part of an immigrant family, moved to multiple locations? How did that inspire you to pursue your career?
So I think, I lived in Canada in the 70s, and I think the immigrant experience in the 70s is a lot different than now. There weren't many, Arabs, even Palestinians in Canada at the time. But I was very conscious of the fact and made very conscious of the fact that I'm Palestinian. I didn't even know my parents were very secular. They're Muslim. I didn't even know I was a Muslim or what Islam was until I moved to Kuwait and had to go to religion classes in school. But I was very aware that I was a Palestinian. But because I think, was a very, I was 7 years old, you're aware as a child. And I also felt very Canadian. I remember this. And moving to Kuwait was actually quite difficult for me to adjust. But eventually, it was fine. And I, acculturated and everything. But I always felt, and I think this is common for everybody who grows up in between different cultures, you never feel at home in one place. But the other side of that is that you can acclimate very easily to different situations, different environments, and different cultures. So I think the fact that I had that sort of shift early on, even though I didn't take it, I didn't do it very well. Eventually, and by virtue of the way life unfolded for my family, we were there, in Kuwait and during the Iraqi invasion. Just constant relocation and me moving around for school and studies and research and work really made me kind of very much aware of who I am, but also that, there's so much more to learn about things outside of your culture.
Mm-hmm.
But but I grew up very much, knowing that I was Palestinian and that I was Arab for sure.
So that influenced your desire to work in sort of a cultural institution, or did that come about differently?
No, what happened is I came to college. Well, growing up in Kuwait. I went to an American school in Kuwait, and in those days, I don't know how it is now. We were not allowed to learn about Arab history in the history curriculum.
Oh.
So the only way I could learn about my culture, say as an Arab or as a Muslim, was in Arabic class. And I took Arabic for a long time as a foreign, as a foreign language. And later in high school, I was shifted into Arabic for native speakers, which is, we took the university, ministry curriculum. And so we learned about, the poetry, and, through poetry and through literature, I was able to learn about the history of, Arabs and Arab civilization, Islamic civilization. But I never learned it as a kind of curriculum itself. So when I got to college in the US, I was very interested in learning about, and I was surprised actually that you could take a class on Islamic art or Middle Eastern history, because
Yeah.
it was not presented to us in that way. So in a way, I was very sort of sheltered in Kuwait, but also came to the US and became very curious about it. And I was also, I came to college when I was 18 in 1989, and those were the days of the first Intifada. And even though obviously I wasn't there and participating, but it was a very monumental event for my generation, at least. And it made me very curious about, Palestinian history and politics. And that made me think about, how our history as Palestinians is very much politicized and tied to, Zionism and Jewish immigration. And I became more curious about, well, what was Palestine like before Jewish immigration? What was Palestine like before Zionism? And in those days, there was still the kind of spiel that, this was a land without a people, for a people without a land. And obviously, every Palestinian knows that's not true. So it became a sort of intellectual, journey for me to learn more about what was Palestine like, before the politicization of that land in the way that it became. So that's how I came into studying Middle East and Middle Eastern history. My sort of foray into museum work and cultural heritage work and the art sectors is a sort of, that came much later. I didn't plan to be a museum director ever in my life until about 2012.
Okay.
So Dana, tell us a little bit about your career journey and going back from academia back to Palestine and then back here.
Yeah. So I majored in history and economics in college, and I went to graduate school to study the history of Palestine before 1948. That's, as I mentioned, that was really something I was interested in knowing about, the culture, the community, the society that was in Palestine before it became as politicized as it is now. So I got my PhD from Harvard in 2004, and I worked on social history of Jerusalem in the 17th century. I looked at family history. Like, the question was, can you write a history of family using the sources that we have, which are not as, for instance, as abundant as in Europe or the United States, North America. So I was, lucky to get a job at Dartmouth College. I taught Middle East Studies there for about 8 years, and but eventually realized that, it just wasn't the place for me. And I think academia, as wonderful as it is, it just wasn't honestly fulfilling for me. There was something missing, and I felt like, life's too short. It's time for a career change. It's time to do something different and try to find fulfillment elsewhere. So I felt I owed that to myself. And I was tenure track, and I sort of told the college I would be leaving before going up for tenure. But as I was transitioning out, this job opened in Palestine at a new museum called the Palestinian Museum that was founded by AANM, which is the largest Palestinian NGO working in Palestine, in the occupied territory, in the 48 areas, and in Lebanon. And I applied and I got the job as head of research and collections, not knowing anything about museums. But I think my background as a
Mm-hmm.
historian, a
Mm-hmm.
researcher, kind of was interesting and compelling to them. So I basically taught myself about museums. While I was still at Dartmouth, I would go to the university museum, the Hood, and I shadowed them for a few months. And then I, made my way to Palestine and worked in this building this museum. I mean, it hadn't even broken ground yet. But I think um, kind of taking that risk and trying something new, going to a new place I'd never, lived. I'd never worked in the Middle East, even though I grew up in Kuwait. Going to a new place, a new sector, a new career was very hard, but I think really, really rewarding. And if you had asked me 15 years ago, would I be in a museum? And I would have been no way. I mean, there would be I had no thoughts of going into museums until that job, kind of found me, or I found it. So just to say that, it's you know, good to take risks sometimes if you can afford it. If you have, I was privileged, I'm not married, I don't have kids. It's just me that's sort of taking the risk. But it kind of trying new things and experiencing new things can be very, very rewarding. From Palestine, I went to Jordan. I don't have a West Bank ID, so I couldn't stay. The visa situation was difficult. I got into cultural heritage work. And in 2019, I came to Michigan for the job at the Arab American National Museum. So a kind of circuitous, journey, but a very interesting and rich one, I think.
And while I was reading your biography, I saw that you worked for a while in Jordan and helped with the Zaatari camp, and you did some programs there. Would love to learn more about that.
Yeah. So when I left. I was in Jordan for a few years before I came to Michigan for the job at the Arab American National Museum. And was working, handling a sort of research program um, for a center called Tiraz, which is run by Widad Qawar and her family. And Widad Qawar is a very famous collector of Palestinian traditional dress, but has, over the years branched out into collecting traditional clothes from various regions in the Middle East. So we were working with other organizations to teach Syrian women and also Syrian kids about their heritage, using the knowledge that was gained from the collection that Widad Qawar had, including a lot of Syrian dress and Syrian embroidery. We were able to work with some kids in Zaatari camp and also Ezra to kind of just, sort of give them an opportunity to learn something about their culture. Some children had been born, were left Syria, they were very young, had been in Jordan for a few years. But we also worked with women in the Zaatari camp and, developed a program where we could teach them a bit, not just about their heritage and the sort of history of embroidery of their, different regions in Syria, but also about color theory and how to sort of create their own sort of designs. And that was a really wonderful experience because I think the women took those workshops as a kind of respite from the daily, burdens of
Struggle, yeah.
life in a refugee camp. And it was a very bonding experience for them. And also for me and my colleague who were leading the workshops, it was very, I think, rewarding and powerful.
Wow, that sounds great. So, and then you moved back to the U.S. to take your role as the director of the American National Museum. Tell us a little bit about the museum, the vision and the mission of the museum.
So the museum, it was founded in 2005. We're located in Dearborn, Michigan, which is the sort of, Dearborn is in the part of Michigan that has the highest concentration of Arabs in the United States. We're part of a larger organization called Access, which was founded in 1971, and it's a health and human services agency, and it provides employment and a lot of other services. And we were part of there was a cultural arts program in the 80s and 90s, and eventually the museum sort of grew out of that. So for the museum functions as a place where we document, preserve, and present the history, culture, and contributions of Arab Americans. Right now, our mission is to serve as a touchstone for communities to connect through Arab culture and Arab American experiences. So we want the museum to be a place where, yes, you can learn about different aspects of Arab American history and culture, but it's really a place where you can learn different things and do with it what you need to do, and inspire you in different ways. So I think at the early days of the museum, it was very much about and understandably being open soon after 9/11 and all the effects of those events, the vilification of Arabs and Muslims, the stereotypes around Arabs as terrorists. There was a compulsion to educate Arabs and non-Arabs about who this community was, what their history was. We've matured a lot, I think, in the last sort of almost 20 years, and there's a lot of interest about the diversity and the variety that exists in Arab American culture, because we do represent. We try to be as comprehensive as we can, and we obviously represent people who come from 22 different countries, theoretically, and this is a region in the world that spans 2 continents. As you know, it's a very rich and diverse place. So there's a lot of we're trying to sort of, as much as we can now, focus on the richness and the diversity of the Arab American experience and Arab American culture.
That's really interesting, and since 2011 and the Arab Spring, there was a big influx of immigrants to the U.S., especially from Syria, Egypt. Walk us more in how you're planning to integrate and help, culturally speaking, help the newcomers integrate with these new communities, and if you have any programs or plans in mind to help them do so.
So we tried as much. So one of the ways we arguably we could do that is through the exhibits. We have core galleries or core permanent exhibits that tell the history of Arab immigration to the United States and acculturation in the United States, and we also highlight sort of important and impactful Arab Americans from the 20th and even the 21st century. So that's one way in which we do it. But because our exhibits have not been exactly updated as much as we would have liked since the opening of the museum, the way in which we get around that around that in terms of sort of representing the new demographic face of Arab Americans, which, as you said, includes new immigrants from Syria, but also from Iraq and from Yemen as well. We really make a point to have that representation in our programming, in our public programming. So, for instance, events, performances, musical performances, book events, workshops, and we have an artist in residence program. We really try hard to bring in, artists from those countries that may not be as represented in the exhibits, to show sort of all this sort of cultural diversity of the community. I will say we don't do a good job of, for instance, and this is something that I'm very keen on working on in the next few years, is really increasing the bilingual content in the museum. So it's very heavy on English. There's very little Arabic in the exhibits. Our programming is not Arabic, heavy at all by any means. We sometimes do bilingual, for instance, story time for children. We have had in recent the past year some bilingual, for instance, performances, whether it's poetry or a play, but we are not, and this is something that we really need to work on. We're not so good about, I think, making sure that new immigrants to the United States, whose first language and strongest language is Arabic, feel as welcome as they should be in the museum. And this is something, like I said, this is a priority for us moving forward in the next few years.
Do you see the museum catering mainly to Arabs or Arab Americans, or also to Americans that want to learn about the Arabic culture?
I think both. I think it's really a place for we see ourselves as stewards of Arab American heritage. We have an archive, a community archive that's arguably the largest and definitely the most comprehensive archive of historical artifacts and documents related to the Arab American community in the country. Um, so we are very keen on ensuring that Arab Americans know that there is a place that values their heritage and their history, and we preserve it and we try to share it with everyone and use it to tell the story of the community in their own words. But we also serve as we have an educational mission to teach Arabs themselves about their community, because a lot of people don't know that, for instance, Arabs have been coming to the United States since the late 19th century. But also to teach non-Arabs about the contributions of the Arab community, and by virtue of other immigrant communities, their contributions and the way that what they did to sort of help build this nation. And it's a way to sort of also provide a bridge for different communities to come together and find common ground. So we sort of it's a two-pronged mission in a way, but I think given the sort of I think the maturity of the museum, the staff, there's a lot of interest in intercommunal sort of dialogue and exchange, learning about the different communities in the United States, learning about how, for instance, the Sudanese American community is different than a Palestinian American, but looking at how the culture, artists from these communities, what are they producing? What are they talking about? How do they see themselves? What are issues of identity that come to them? There's sort of more curiosity in that regard, and I think that's something that we're sort of working and thinking about, mostly in terms of our programs.
That's great. Actually, I meant to mention, it's interesting you say that, part of the role is to educate Arabs about their own culture, about the contribution of the Arab Americans to the United States, because when we started the podcast, we wanted to do kind of like a little promo about the history of Arab immigration, and we had a really hard time finding information. Information was lacking, it was incomplete, and it was kind of like inconsistent. So it's like, are we finding the most credible information? We wondered, like, is there any cultural institution or any institution that's working on documenting the history of Arab immigration and the contribution of Arabs to this country? Because, like you said, I mean, we've been here for more than a century, and there's a lot of Arabs that contributed big time for this country. So the question I meant to ask you here is, when you talk about having diverse voices of Arabs, you have different subcultures of Arabs, and also you have the different sects and religions and ideologies, on whether it's like political or cultural. So if you can walk us through the challenge of trying to represent such a massive and diverse pool of people.
It's an impossible task. Sorry, I cut you off.
No. I mean, it's kind of like an open-ended question of like, how do you guys approach it? Because I know it's, like you said, it's an impossible task, but how do you approach it when you plan for programming or initiatives to say, okay, I want to cater to people of all these different subcultures and ideologies there? Or do you get pushback even on some programming from people who see the culture differently than what you are presenting?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's a very, like, I mean, I was joking, but not really. It's almost an impossible task to sort of, be a museum or an institution that represents a community that's as diverse as ours. So it's very hard to please everybody. I think we do our best to be as, I'd say, representative as possible. But you're always fighting an uphill battle, I think, because not only do you to be an Arab American, you have to not only buy into this idea of being an Arab, but you have to buy into being an Arab American necessarily, right? So what we try to do is include people in the museum, whether it's their stories or, their, aspects of their culture, or whether they're individuals that we find inspirational. They have to see themselves first and foremost as Arab and Arab American. If they don't, and there are many people we would consider, you and I might consider an Arab, that don't see themselves as Arab. So identity politics is something we're constantly dealing with, and it's shifting, right? But it's really, it's a very difficult, sort of, you're on this tightrope all the time. And what we try to do is, we're very conscious of finding, for instance, let's say artists who are doing things that are not sort of kind of typically traditionally Arab. We look for artists who are sort of taking the Arab heritage or the Arab American identity and doing and sort of interpreting it, or doing something interesting with it in a very novel way. And I think we try to sort of also move away from, it's very heavily Levantine, Bilad al-Sham. They are the original community very much. It's the Syrian, Lebanese, Palestinian who came, and the Yemenis also came very early on as well. But the museum is very heavy on, let's say, the Syrian, general, sort of Bilad al-Sham community. We're very conscious of trying to integrate non-Levantines into the museum one way or another. But it's a very conscious choice to do that. And I think one of the ways that we need to be better at doing that is sort of engaging very closely and directly with the different communities in the United States, which is something I think we also need to work more on. So reaching out to the Egyptian communities in various parts of the US, reaching out to the Sudanese community, reaching out to the Moroccan community, and understanding what their experience has been. How are those experiences shared? How are they different than the others? But it's hard. I mean, there's also the religious component. I mean, many people think we're too Muslim. Many people think we're too Christian. So, it's always a sort of a balancing act that you just kind of have to say, I can't please everybody all the time, but I can only do my best, and to stay curious and open, and really sort of keep your eye on, what the younger generation of Arab Americans are doing and thinking. Because I think, that's the direction that the museum is going in. I think because, we want to be there for future generations, and we need to be sort of aware of what they, identify as their culture and what values they have.
Dana, I'm really curious to know about your thoughts about the religion aspect and the politics aspect. When we start our platform and podcast, we decided to put aside arguably the top two divisive topics in the Arab world, which are the religion and the politics. We all see that we try to come together as Arabs in one language, one culture, common culture, but we always have these roadblocks of, you are from a different religion, different sect, you support certain politics, you support certain movement in the Arab world. We recently met with Rani Maali, who's also Palestinian in Chicago. He's one of the amazing musicians here, and he also shared his struggle growing up, that he wanted something culturally for Arabs in terms of music, language, theater, but he also had this struggle that it's always attached to a certain religious aspect, or for example, churches used to do a lot of their activity inside the church or mosques. How are you guys approaching the inclusivity part of the Arabs and being as inclusive as possible?
I mean, we don't sort of, we're very clear that we're a sort of secular organization, even though we do sort of family parties around the holidays, for instance.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Christmas party, we do a party for Eid every year. But apart from that, and apart, we present religion as an aspect of culture. Um, so, many Arabs are, I mean, like any other any other community, can be religious, observe religious rituals, whether they're Christian, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Jewish, whether they're, various sects within, each kind of each faith. Um, I don't think you can, I mean, we try to sort of, yes, we try to kind of underline the shared values or the shared culture, what binds us rather than what divides us. But we're also very clear that the Arab American community is a big family, right? And like any family, you have members that are different than other members, and that their difference doesn't necessarily mean it's a point of contention or it's a division among us. It just means we're different. And so, for instance, one of the things we did, we have in our permanent galleries, we had for many years what we used to call a road movie. It was a movie made in the early 2000s. A woman went around, the filmmaker director, she went around the United States and filmed different Arab American communities, how they lived, their private lives and, family life. So this last couple of years ago, we commissioned, we had a competition, we commissioned 4 filmmakers to make short, 4-minute films about their individual communities. And the idea being that we want to show how, in many ways, how different we are, but in the difference, there's always something relatable, right? And so, the one was by a young Yemeni director, a Sudanese woman, a Lebanese American, each looking at some particular aspect of their lives and their culture and their, and their environment. I think, I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that sort of being very heavy-handed about we're one people, we're inclusive, we're this, kind of detracts from the richness and the variety. And you can have difference, you can have variety, you can have these things and still have a shared sort of you can still come together in a certain way and support one another. So I guess that's what I don't know if I'm making myself very clear, but it's really to celebrate the differences, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be one form of Arab culture, one form of Arabness, one dialect, one history. And I really see the Arab identity, I do see it as an inclusive identity. And since coming to the United States, coming back in 2019 for this job, and seeing Arab identity as a kind of exclusive one, that for me was a bit of it took me a while to sort of come to terms with that. For me, Arabness was also always an inclusive thing, because you just have to speak Arab. If you're an Arab, if you speak Arabic,
right.
It kind of, sort of transcended race and ethnicity and religion, right? But now there's a sort of, some people feel no, Arab is very exclusive. So I try to, we try to sort of bring people together under this one roof of the museum, if they want to be Arab, but also at the same time understand and be very clear that there is no one definition of Arab. You can be Arab, be very different than the Arab sitting next to you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something we grapple with a lot, and it's almost like I said, this is what I mean. It's an impossible task in a way to sort of appeal to all 4 million Arabs in the United States,
right.
arguably. But we just do the best we can by highlighting the richness and the diversity of this community.
Right. So Diana, you talked about, reaching out to different communities, Arab communities throughout the country. Do you guys collaborate with any other cultural institutions, whether locally in Michigan or nationally?
We work a lot with, for instance, organizations like University Musical Society, UMS, at the University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
They're the oldest arts presenters, musical art presenter in the country, very well established. So we work a lot with them in terms of bringing, sharing resources and bringing, musical acts that might be, kind of very new for their audiences, but and also very appreciated by ours. We work with the universities a lot. We work mostly with sort of regional institutions, but we do, for instance, we have an online film series. Every month we show a film, and that's done in collaboration with two other Middle Eastern Arab American organizations, Arab Film and Media Institute in California and Arte East in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
So both of whom they sort of specialize in film. We have a film festival, but we don't specialize in film, but we do have a film festival every year, and really have been able to, especially during COVID, when we shifted all to online programming, we were able to bring these organizations together and collaborate and present a monthly film series that we're still doing now, sort of 3 years later.
Okay. I just want to circle back to a comment you mentioned about arguably 4 million Arabs in the U.S. And we don't have clear numbers. The census has been a struggle for Arabs for the past decades, that there's no clear representation in the census surveys. Mm-hmm. Would love to learn more about your thoughts about this issue, and if there's any education or any efforts from your end as a museum or Access Institute to spread awareness about this issue and advocate to get that checkbox on the next census.
Yeah, the museum doesn't work directly on these initiatives, but there is another institution in Access called NAC, National Network of Arab American Communities, as well as there's a sort of a nascent center called the Center for Arab Narratives that's housed at the museum, but not the museum exactly. But both of them are working on, and they're working with the Census Bureau to push the MENA category in the census. The efforts are very sort of heartwarming. I think I predict that in the next census there will be a MENA category. It's important because if you're designated as a minority, not only will be able to be counted, but also all of these sort of benefits that can go to minorities will come to the Arab community. Mm-hmm. We're right now designated as white. There's serious differences in, sort of demographic data between white communities and Arab communities. And I think just understanding and knowing and learning more about the Arab community, identifying them as such, not only will they, for instance, be a bit more funding, but also understanding health issues or educational issues. I think we can only benefit from having this MENA category. So we don't work, like I said, we don't work directly on this. We're very much in support of it, but there are other initiatives at Access that are working on very strongly, in Washington to make sure that the MENA category will be on the next census. So, like I said, meetings and talks with the Census Bureau and the Office of Budget Management to make sure that there is a category. So if you want me to put you in touch with people, I definitely can. I think this would be a great subject for another podcast, because it's something I think a lot of people are not terribly aware mm-hmm. Of the importance of the MENA category. Some people are also turned off by the Middle East, North Africa label, mm-hmm. which is really a shame. I mean, I think it's not about identity, it's just about counting right. people from this region, and making sure that we have good, solid data about the community. Mm-hmm. If we don't have a category, we're not going to get that data. So I really, I would encourage you to, I don't know if you have already, but I can definitely put you in touch with people at Access who are working on this and have made it a priority.
Yeah, I would love to. You know, we actually chatted with the director of the Arab American Institute in
Uh-huh.
Michigan last year, and we talked about the subject, and we talked to multiple people, and we're actually working with the mayor's office here in Chicago to make them aware, because I mean, we looked on a business level. We're not classified as a minority. I mean, you know, you can be a Syrian refugee, but still you're not a minority, or you know, you can be a wealthy Mexican and you're a minority, and we're like, you know, what's the issue there, and they were not really aware. It was not brought up to them before, and they were receptive to hearing about it. I'm not sure that there's a big enough community or political will to move on it locally in Chicago, but if it starts nationally, I'm sure it will trickle down to the big cities that try to be inclusive as much as they can
Yeah.
when there's an opportunity to do so. So then, what are you excited about in the new year? Any new programs or initiatives that you guys are launching in 2023?
You know, yes, there's a lot going on at the museum. I'm really excited about, we are planning to do a rooftop garden this year. So we have some years we do themes. So the programming and some of the events revolve around a particular theme. Last year it was futurism. This year it's called Cultivate and Grow. So to see the
Okay.
museum as a kind of, place to, to nourish and to nurture talent. But also we're trying to do like I said, a rooftop garden where we want people who have brought seeds with them from their hometowns or home villages, have brought them over to the United States and continue to plant them and pass the shoots and share the shoots and the sort of the produce with families. So they're like kind of like heirloom seeds. And you find this in all immigrant communities. But what we want to do is sort of have people donate some of the seeds or plants or cuttings, grow them, but also interview them, create these sort of oral history interviews around the plants that they've brought with them. What are the stories? And really make it a kind of living exhibit. And also do programming around kind of gardening and the importance of, food, planting, gardening, and the sort of immigrant experience, and specifically the Arab immigrant experience. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's a
Exciting.
lot for us to do. We've never done something like that before, but that's what sort of I think is exciting about working in a museum. There's never really routine. That might be a bad thing because it can be very exhausting. There's always new things
Right.
happening. But that's something that I'm looking forward to. Also in September, we will do hopefully, inshallah, our second rendition of Jema. This is a musical festival that we do, music and arts. Last year, 2021, sorry, we did it online, 4 days online musical festival. And this year, hopefully we're going to do it just 2 days, but it's going to be in person and online as well. So we're looking forward to that.
Exciting.
Then how can we and our community help out with your activity and programs?
Become members of the museum. It's a great way to just support us, learn about what we're doing. A lot of our programming still remains online. That's been COVID was very hard on everybody and especially the museum. But the one benefit, or one of the benefits we got out of it, surprising, was that we were able to really ramp up our online programming and reach thousands of new audiences, Arabs all around. Like we really became a national museum during COVID because we were just connecting with our national community and also internationally as well. So becoming a member, learning about our events, signing up for the email blast is really a great way to support us. Also understanding that we do have like I said, a community archive. We have a very rich archive of historical documents and artifacts. If you have family photos, if you have things that you just don't know what to do with, or you're like, we can help you preserve them. We don't need them per se, but we would like to have a copy. Reach out to us. We can sort of teach you how to preserve things and sort of, but also possibly get copies that can enrich the archive, the digital, the database, and that can be a boon to, researchers and scholars who want to study the community. So yeah, those are ways in which, people who don't necessarily live in Detroit or, are within, visiting distance can support the museum. And just tell your friends about it. It's really, we're a Smithsonian affiliate. We're accredited by the American Alliance of Museums. These are hallmarks of museum excellence. So I think it's also an institution to be proud of. We have dedicated staff that, work day in, day out to sort of preserve and share the accomplishments, the culture, the history of our community.
Amazing.
Right, you guys are doing incredible work, and we will make sure to support it and spread the word as much as
Thank
we
you
can.
very much.
So just in closing, a quick fire round for you, just about you, Diana. What inspires you day in and day out?
Oh, these questions are really hard. What inspires me? I think my staff inspire me. They drive me crazy, but I think they really, they're very creative and innovative, and I try to keep up with them. But I think they inspire me to sort of, do my best and show up every day.
Okay. And what is the best and the worst moment in your recent career with the Arab American National Museum?
My worst moment was, I would have to say, April 2020, when I had to lay off a lot of staff because of COVID, and we were expecting serious losses, and it just was, a financially responsible thing to do. Unfortunately, it was a very, very, very hard decision. And that was probably really, the worst day of my life. The best day, there've been really some very great days. I don't know if I have a one best day, but it's just, learning something new, finding something in the archive, or, attending a performance that's really sublime and, sort of takes you out of your, sort of, it just, takes you somewhere else. So I think those are the good days for me.
Diana, what's your advice to young Arabs and Arab Americans that, whether they want to switch jobs or they're still searching for their passion? What's your advice to them in terms of taking the leap or just stay conservative? What would you recommend?
Just to understand that first of all, to know that the ability to switch careers in the way I did, I'm very privileged to be able to do so. I understand a lot of people cannot afford that kind of, change. But if you can, I think just being, it's a scary thing. Change is wonderful, but it's also scary. But being brave and going for the change and taking a risk, even if ends up being a complete failure, just knowing that there's always something you can learn from trying something new. Just keeping your mind open, staying curious, meeting new people, learning new things. There's always something that you can learn and grow from when taking on a risk and doing something different. It's just I worry about young people who just stay in the same place and don't kind of branch out, are not curious about the world. I just encourage them it's okay to fail. We all fail. You don't learn unless you fail, and I think that's something that you have to sort of embrace failure, knowing that that's the only way that you could learn and become stronger or better at whatever you want to do.
And probably the feeling of regret is way worse than the feeling of failure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the main motivation. I don't want to regret, like when I'm 70 or 80 years old, I don't want to look back and regret because there's nothing I can do about it. But if I fail now, I can still bounce back.
Get back on track, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the next time you take a risk, the failure might be softer, right? And then you get better and you're just more wiser, I think, as well. But yeah, regret, you don't want to live with too many regrets. Definitely.
Agree.
And you're always going to have regrets.
Right.
You can't do everything you want to do. But
Agree.
I think being afraid of change is something that, I really caution people against, and really trying to fight that fear if they have that fear. And I used to be very afraid of change. So this is a new, like, this is something I had to learn over the years. But I think that's what I would, yeah.
Great. Well, we really enjoyed the conversation. Would love to keep it going. I would love to come and visit you guys in person
Please
sometime
come.
Soon.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're
Would
more than
love to
welcome.
meet you and would love to tour the museum sometime soon. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And
Thanks
keep the
for having
conversation
me
going.
and your interest in the museum.
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely.